I stood quietly at the head of the dining table in our family estate, holding a glass of iced water. Seated around the room were 30 of my husband's most conservative, judgmental relatives, dressed in their Sunday best, their faces already arranged into the specific expression people wear when they've come to watch a woman fall. At the center of the room, my mother-in-law, Beatrice, was wiping fake tears with a monogrammed handkerchief she kept for exactly this kind of performance. She had just slammed a medical laboratory report onto the table, the paper skidding to a stop inches from my untouched place setting. It declared in cold clinical print that I was 2 months pregnant. My husband, David, had been deployed overseas on a corporate assignment for the past 6 months. Beatrice's voice cracked theatrically as she rose to her feet. "How could you?" she said, loud enough for the back row of gray tants to hear clearly. "How could you disgrace this family, disgrace my son while he is halfway across the world working himself to exhaustion for you?" She turned to the room, one hand pressed to her chest. "She's been sleeping with her CEO. I have proof." She slid a second document across the table, a pre-drafted divorce agreement already notarized, already waiting only for my signature. It left me with nothing. Not the house. Not the accounts. Not the maternal estate I'd inherited 8 months earlier from my grandfather, the one Beatrice had spent every family dinner since circling like a shark scenting blood in the water. They thought the sheer weight of public shame would force me to break down, sign the papers, and run away in tears. They had planned for this moment the way other people plan weddings. The seating, the timing, the 72-year-old family patriarch positioned at the head of the table to lend the whole spectacle the appearance of a tribunal rather than an ambush. They didn't know that because Beatrice had a habit of snooping through my things, my jewelry box, my mail, the locked drawer in my desk she thought I didn't know she'd picked twice. I had installed a micro camera disguised as an air freshener in my master bathroom 4 months earlier. They didn't know that I had already reviewed the footage from the morning of my routine checkup. I didn't defend myself, I didn't cry. I set down my glass of water and I pulled out my phone, and I synced it to the massive 75-inch smart TV mounted on the dining room wall. The one Beatrice had insisted on installing for exactly this kind of family gathering. Instead of a tearful confession, the TV played crystal clear footage of my unmarried, endlessly praised, supposedly pure sister-in-law Chloe squatting over my medical sample cup in my own bathroom, while Beatrice stood guard at the door, whispering, "Make sure you fill it up. This is our ticket to her inheritance." The room went dead silent. Chloe turned ash-white and covered her face with both hands. Beatrice's fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by sheer, naked terror. I picked up the fraudulent lab report, tore it cleanly in half, and dropped my own divorce papers on the table beside the wreckage, complete with a lawsuit against Beatrice and the corrupt clinic for medical fraud and defamation. 6 months earlier, I hadn't known any of this was coming. I only knew that my husband had left for Singapore with a suitcase and an apology, and that the house had gotten very quiet, and that Beatrice had started coming over 3 times a week to keep me company, which was, I would later understand, never once what it looked like. I'd inherited the money that spring. My grandfather, Walter, had raised me for the better part of a decade after my parents died, and when he passed, he left everything to me directly, not to David, not to the family. A distinction his lawyer had been careful to specify in language so airtight that even Beatrice's attorney, when she inevitably sent one to investigate, had come back empty-handed. $4 million, a house on the coast, a modest but growing stock portfolio. Enough to change the shape of a life. Enough, apparently, to change the shape of a family. David had been thrilled for me in his distracted way. He was thrilled about most things in that period, in the vague, agreeable manner of a man who has spent his entire life avoiding the discomfort of conflict by simply nodding along with whoever spoke last. I loved him. I want to be honest about that, even now, even after everything. But I had learned early in our marriage that David's spine went soft the instant his mother raised her voice, and Beatrice had raised her voice about my inheritance more or less continuously since the reading of the will. "It should stay in the family," she'd said more than once at more dinners than I could count, as though I weren't sitting 3 feet away, as though I weren't already family. "Walter should have set up a trust, a joint account, something sensible." She'd say this while refilling my wine glass with a smile so warm a stranger might have mistaken it for affection. Chloe was different, quieter, sharper, 26 years old and still living in Beatrice's guest house under the family's unofficial but rigidly enforced rule that unmarried daughters remained under supervision until a suitable husband appeared. She'd been engaged once briefly, to a man from a good family who'd broken it off after 8 months for reasons nobody discussed at dinner. I'd always assumed Chloe resented that silence more than she let on. I hadn't understood that spring exactly how much she had to hide inside it. David left for Singapore in March. 6 months, his company said, possibly extending to 8. I drove him to the airport myself, and he held my face in both hands at the security line and told me he loved me. And I believed him, the way you believe things you have no particular reason yet to doubt. Beatrice moved into a kind of orbit around me almost immediately. She brought food I hadn't asked for. She let herself into the house with the spare key David had given her years earlier, for emergencies, a category she had apparently redefined to include Tuesday afternoons. I found her once in my closet, ostensibly looking for a sweater she'd lent me, standing very still with my jewelry box open in her hands. She smiled and said she'd been admiring my grandmother's brooch. I didn't call her a liar. I simply changed the locks the following week and told David it was for security while he was away. And he agreed without asking a single follow-up question, which told me everything I needed to know about how this would go if I ever needed him to take my side against his mother. I noticed the camera necessity the same week I found her in my closet. It wasn't paranoia, exactly. It was pattern recognition, the specific instinct of a woman who has watched someone circle her possessions long enough to know circling eventually ends in taking. I ordered the device online, a small motion-activated camera disguised as an air freshener, the kind marketed for catching nannies or contractors. And I installed it myself in the master bathroom on a Sunday afternoon while Beatrice was at church, angled toward the vanity and the shower, feeding quietly to an app on my phone that I checked perhaps once a week, mostly to confirm nothing had happened at all. Nothing had, until the morning of my annual physical. I remember that morning with a kind of aching, ordinary clarity, precisely because nothing about it felt significant while it was happening. I filled the sample cup the clinic had mailed ahead for my at-home collection kit, a new service my doctor's office had started offering, meant to save patients the indignity of hospital bathrooms. And I left it exactly where the instructions said to leave it, on the vanity, sealed, labeled, ready for the courier who'd collect it at noon. Beatrice had come by that morning with a casserole dish she said needed to go straight into my freezer. Chloe had come with her, which was unusual. Chloe rarely visited on weekday mornings, and when she did, she rarely said more than a handful of words before retreating to whatever corner of the house didn't require conversation. I let them in. I thanked Beatrice for the casserole. I went back to my study to finish an email for work, and I did not think, not for one single moment, to wonder why my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had suddenly developed an interest in visiting together. On a Tuesday, at exactly the hour I'd mentioned, in passing, over dinner 3 days earlier, that I'd be collecting a sample for my physical. By the time the courier arrived at noon, the cup on my vanity was still sealed, still labeled, still, as far as I could tell, exactly as I'd left it. I had no reason, that afternoon, to believe it wasn't mine. The clinic called on a Thursday afternoon, and Beatrice answered my phone. I found this out only after the fact, pieced together from the wreckage of what followed. But the sequence itself was almost admirable in its efficiency. Beatrice had been at the house again. She'd taken to simply letting herself in through the back door by then, some new liberty she'd granted herself without asking. And when my phone rang on the kitchen counter while I was upstairs on a work call, she picked it up. The clinic's nurse, following standard protocol, confirmed a positive result and asked to schedule a follow-up consultation regarding prenatal care. I didn't hear any of this happen. I only knew 3 hours later that Beatrice had left without saying goodbye, and that by Friday morning, my phone would not stop ringing. The first call was my aunt, a woman I hadn't spoken to in months, asking in a strange, careful voice whether everything was all right between David and me. The second was a cousin I barely knew, texting a single question mark and nothing else, the kind of message that only makes sense once you understand it's the tip of something enormous moving beneath the surface. By Friday afternoon, I understood, with a sick, sinking clarity, that Beatrice had spent less than 24 hours transforming a phone call meant for me into a wildfire, consuming the entire extended family. I called her directly. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, why my aunt seemed to believe I was pregnant, why my cousin had sent me a question mark instead of a hello. Beatrice's voice, when it came, had a texture I'd never heard from her before, not warmth, not even her usual practiced concern, but something flat and satisfied, the voice of a woman watching a plan click into place exactly as designed. "The clinic called, dear," she said. "I didn't think it was something to hide. David deserves to know his wife is expecting, doesn't he? Unless there's some reason you don't want people to know. I'm not pregnant, Beatrice. The lab results say otherwise." A pause long enough to feel deliberate. "I do wonder, though, David's been gone 6 months. I hung up before she could finish whatever sentence she'd constructed to follow that pause. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand and felt something in my chest tilt sideways. The specific vertigo of realizing the ground you're standing on was never as solid as you'd believe. The email from HR arrived Monday morning before I'd even finished my coffee. It was carefully, bloodlessly worded. An anonymous concern has been raised regarding conduct that may reflect on the firm's reputation, but I didn't need it spelled out any further to understand what it meant or who had likely made the call. I'd built 11 years at that company. I'd made partner 2 years earlier, the youngest woman in the firm's history to do it. And I sat in an HR conference room that Tuesday listening to a compliance officer read me a summary of an anonymous tip alleging an inappropriate relationship with my CEO. A man I had spoken to perhaps 4 times in as many years, always in groups, always about quarterly projection. I did not cry in that meeting. I remember being almost proud of that, distantly, the way you notice a small kindness your body does for you in the middle of a catastrophe. I told them the allegation was false, that I would cooperate fully with whatever they needed to verify it, and I walked out of that building with my hands steady and my composure intact, and got exactly 4 blocks before I had to sit down on a bus bench and put my head between my knees until the shaking stopped. Because here was the thing that made no sense, the detail that kept snagging in my mind like fabric on a nail. I knew, with total physical certainty, that I was not pregnant. I'd got my period 2 weeks earlier, ordinary and unremarkable, the kind of biological fact a body simply reports without asking permission. A lab result claiming otherwise wasn't a mistake. Mistakes didn't also happen to align perfectly with a fortnight of Beatrice's sudden, uncharacteristic visits. That night, I opened the camera app on my phone for the first time in nearly 2 months. I want to explain what that felt like, sitting alone at my kitchen table with the house gone dark and silent around me, scrolling backward through weeks of motion-triggered footage. Mostly nothing. Mostly me brushing my teeth or Beatrice hunting through my medicine cabinet for reasons she never once had a good excuse for until I found the date. The Tuesday. The casserole. My stomach had already dropped by the time I pressed play, some animal part of my brain arriving at the truth several seconds before my conscious mind caught up. The footage was better quality than I'd expected, crisp enough to see the label on the sample cup, crisp enough to see Chloe's face. She came in first, glancing back over her shoulder toward the hallway. Beatrice followed a moment later and posted herself at the bathroom door, her body angled to block the sightline from the hall, a lookout doing exactly what lookouts do. Chloe crossed to the vanity, picked up my sealed sample cup, and with the brisk, practiced efficiency of someone who had clearly rehearsed this, broke the seal, emptied it into the sink, and squatted to refill it with her own urine from a travel cup she'd carried inside her jacket pocket. I heard Beatrice's voice, low, urgent, exactly as clear as it would later be on that 75-inch television. "Make sure you fill it up. This is our ticket to her inheritance." Chloe resealed the cup, wiped it down with a tissue, and set it back on the vanity in precisely the position it had occupied before, angled at precisely the same tilt. It was, I remember thinking, almost impressive, in the specific way that competence in service of cruelty is always slightly more chilling than incompetence would have been. I watched it 4 times. I did not cry watching it, not once, and I understood, somewhere around the third viewing, that whatever softness in me might once have wept over a betrayal like this had been methodically burned away over the preceding week by phone calls, HR meetings, and a mother-in-law's flat, satisfied voice. What was left in its place was colder and far more useful. I did not confront Beatrice. I did not confront Chloe. I understood, with the same clarity that had let me watch that footage without breaking, that a private confrontation would only hand them time to delete evidence, time to construct a counterstory, time to close ranks the way families like this one always closed ranks when threatened from within. I needed something they couldn't spin, couldn't deny, couldn't bury in family loyalty and 30 relatives' willingness to believe whatever kept the peace. I booked a private blood test the next morning, the kind with a chain of custody protocol specifically designed to hold up in court, and had the results, unambiguous, unequivocal, not pregnant, sent directly to my personal email and a certified copy mailed to my home address. I filed a formal complaint with the state medical board against the clinic, citing chain of custody violations and demanding an investigation into how a mailed-at-home collection kit had produced a result inconsistent with a subsequent independent test taken 4 days later. And I called a lawyer, not David's family's lawyer, not anyone who had ever sat at Beatrice's table, but a sharp, unsentimental woman named Priya Anand who specialized in exactly this particular flavor of domestic financial warfare. I brought her the footage, I brought her the blood test. I brought her, at her request, every text message, every voicemail, every version of the story Beatrice had already begun constructing across the family group chat. A slow-motion character assassination I'd been too consumed with survival to fully register, until I saw it all laid out chronologically on Priya's conference table. She watched the bathroom footage in silence twice, her expression unreadable. When it ended the second time, she sat back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "You understand what you actually have here," she said. "This isn't just grounds for divorce with full asset protection. This is medical fraud, this is defamation with actual malice. This is a documented conspiracy involving at least 2 individuals and a complicit clinic technician. You don't just have a divorce case, Clara." She tapped the folder closed. "You have a lawsuit that's going to bury this entire family." I looked at the folder for a long moment before I answered. "Good," I said, "let's build it." Beatrice announced the banquet on a Wednesday, framing it in the family group chat as a celebration of the harvest season, an old tradition her own mother had kept, a chance to bring the whole clan together before the autumn scattered everyone back into their separate lives. She tagged me directly in the message, a courtesy so uncharacteristic it told me everything about what she'd actually planned. "Of course you'll come, Clara. Family is family, no matter what." Priya and I both understood, within about 4 seconds of me forwarding her the message, exactly what kind of celebration this was going to be. "She's building an audience," Priya said, reading it over on her tablet. "Elders specifically, people whose approval matters to David's side of the family, people who will remember this dinner for the next 20 years and repeat their version of it at every subsequent gathering. She wants witnesses to your humiliation before you've had a chance to build a defense in anyone's eyes but hers." She looked up at me. "It's actually useful to us. A public accusation is a public liability once the truth comes out, but you need to be ready to let her finish. All of it. Every accusation, every insult on the record, in front of everyone she's invited. You want me to just sit there? I want you to let her hang herself in front of the one audience she can't later gaslight into forgetting it happened." I spent the 4 days before the banquet the way I imagine soldiers spend the night before a deployment, not dreading it, exactly, but organizing myself around it, checking and rechecking the few things within my control. I charged my phone to full the night before and again that morning. I tested the TV casting app 3 separate times against my own living room television, timing exactly how long it took to sync, refining the sequence until I could execute it in under 8 seconds without looking down. I chose my outfit with the same deliberate calm I'd feel, months later, telling this story to people who asked how I'd managed to stay so composed. A deep charcoal dress, understated, expensive without announcing itself. The specific armor of a woman who intends to be underestimated for exactly as long as it serves her. The family estate looked, That evening, like it always did for these gatherings, long tables draped in white linen set up across the back lawn and spilling into the formal dining room. String lights threaded through the old oak trees, the particular abundance of a family that had never once had to think seriously about money. 31 relatives, by my count, arrived over the course of an hour, embracing each other with the practiced warmth of people who saw each other 4 times a year, and had long ago perfected the choreography of pretending that was enough. David's grandmother, Eleanor, 78 years old and still sharper than most people half her age, held my hands in both of hers when I arrived and studied my face for a moment longer than necessary. "You look tired, dear," she said, not unkindly. I told her I'd been under the weather. She didn't press further, but something in her expression suggested she'd filed the observation away for later use, and I would come to be grateful before the night was over that she had. Dinner proceeded almost normally for the first hour. Almost. I could feel it underneath the surface of every polite exchange. The way certain aunts' eyes slid toward me and away too quickly. The way conversations near me dipped into lowered voices when I approached. The way Chloe sat 3 seats down the table refusing entirely to meet my eyes. Her hand resting against her stomach in a gesture she likely didn't even realize she was making. Beatrice sat at the head of the table beside the family patriarch, David's Uncle Richard, radiating the particular serenity of a woman who has already written the ending to tonight's story and is simply waiting for everyone else to arrive at the final page. She waited until dessert. She rose slowly, deliberately, tapping her wine glass with a spoon until the entire lawn quieted. 31 faces turning toward her with the reflexive attention of people conditioned over decades to give Beatrice the floor whenever she wanted it. "I have something difficult to share," she began, her voice already trembling with manufactured grief. "Something I've been carrying alone for days because I couldn't bear to burden this family with it. But I love you all too much to let a lie continue in our midst." She reached into her handbag and produced the folded lab report, and I watched 31 sets of eyes track its movement with the specific hunger of people who sense, correctly, that they are about to witness something they'll be discussing for years. "Clara is pregnant," Beatrice said, and let the words land, let them ripple down the table in gasps and sharp intakes of breath, and one older cousin's hand flying to her mouth. 2 months along, while my son, my David, has been overseas for 6 months, working himself to exhaustion to provide for her. Her voice cracked right on cue. I didn't want to believe it either. I prayed I was wrong, but the clinic confirmed it themselves. She slid the report down the table until it stopped in front of my plate. "Whose is it, Clara?" Her voice rose now, sharpening from grief into something closer to prosecution. "Is it that CEO of yours, the one you're always working late with? Because David called me last week, so happy, so proud of his hardworking wife, and I couldn't even tell him. I couldn't bring myself to break his heart from 6,000 miles away. I sat perfectly still. I let the accusation finish landing. I let Uncle Richard's face darken with the specific disgust of a patriarch discovering rot in his own bloodline. I let a cousin I'd known for a decade whisper the word disgusting loud enough for the whole table to hear and choose not to lower her voice about it. I let it all happen, exactly as Priya had told me to, because every second of silence I gave them was a second they were spending hanging themselves on tape in front of everyone with nothing left to later deny. Beatrice reached back into her handbag and produced the second document, sliding it across the linen tablecloth until it came to rest against my folded hands. "Sign it," she said, "tonight, in front of everyone. Release the house, release the accounts, release that inheritance you've never deserved to a family you've apparently decided means nothing to you." Her voice climbed to a full theatrical shout now, loud enough to silence even the crickets in the oak trees, loud enough that I saw, at the far end of the table, Eleanor's spoon go very still in her hand. "You lying, deceitful little tramp." The whole lawn went silent. 31 faces turned toward me, waiting, hungry, certain of exactly what they were about to see: a broken woman, caught, finally cracking under the weight of her own guilt. My hand was already moving. Quietly, beneath the edge of the table, out of anyone's line of sight, my fingers found my phone in the folds of my napkin and slid it free. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned the phone in my hand until the screen faced the 75-inch television mounted on the exterior wall of the veranda, Beatrice's own addition, installed the previous summer for exactly this kind of gathering, for football games and toasts, and apparently for whatever she'd imagined tonight would become, and I pressed cast. It took, by my own count, 6 seconds to connect. I had practiced for 8. The screen flickered from a dark standby logo into a crisp, bathroom-lit image, and 31 faces that had been fixed on me a moment earlier turned, one by one, toward the wall behind me, drawn by the sudden burst of light and motion the way faces always turn toward a television that has just come alive in a quiet room. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice even, unhurried, pitched to carry exactly as far as Beatrice's had a moment earlier, "I think everyone should see where that lab result actually came from." The footage began to play. Chloe glancing back over her shoulder. Beatrice posting herself at the bathroom door, her body angled to block the sightline from the hall. Chloe crossing to the vanity, the seal breaking, the sink. The travel cup withdrawn from her jacket pocket, the awkward practice squat, and then unmistakable, unedited, time-stamped in the corner of the frame with the date and hour that matched exactly the morning Beatrice had brought her uninvited casserole. Beatrice's own voice, low and urgent and utterly damning, filling the silence of 31 stunned relatives on a lawn strung with string lights. "Make sure you fill it up. This is our ticket to her inheritance." I did not need to say another word. The footage said all of it in Beatrice's own voice, with Chloe's own face turned toward the camera at the exact moment the seal broke, clear enough that even Uncle Richard, 3 seats down, could be heard exhaling a single, disbelieving word under his breath. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. She had gone the color of the tablecloth, her whole body curling inward as though she could physically fold herself out of the frame, still playing 8 feet behind her. Beatrice's face did something I had genuinely never seen it do in 6 years of marriage. The practiced grief simply evaporated, replaced by a raw, scrambling terror. Her eyes darting from the screen to the faces around the table to me and back again, searching, uselessly, for a version of this moment she could still talk her way out of. That's edited," she said, too loud, too fast. "That's not Richard, you can't possibly believe. I can see your mouth moving, Beatrice." Uncle Richard's voice was very quiet, which somehow landed harder than shouting would have. "I can hear your voice. Whose ticket to whose inheritance?" Alina rose from her seat at the far end of the table, 78 years old, moving slowly, deliberately, every eye on the lawn following her, and walked the length of it until she stood directly across from Beatrice, close enough that I could see her hands trembling very slightly around the head of her cane, not from age, but from something closer to fury held on a very short leash. "I have sat at this table for 40 years, Alina said, "and watched you decide again and again who in this family deserved love and who deserved to be discarded. I let it go more times than I should have because you are my son's wife and I wanted peace." She looked at the frozen frame still glowing on the screen behind us, Chloe's face, the sample cup, Beatrice's shadow at the door. "This is not discipline, Beatrice, this is fraud. You have humiliated an innocent woman in front of her entire family to steal her inheritance for your daughter's mistake, and I want you to understand, right now in front of everyone here, that I will never forget this. Not for the rest of whatever life you have left." Chloe was crying now, real tears, the kind that come only after the performance has become useless. "I didn't want to," she said, to no one in particular, to everyone. Mom said it would just be a scare, that David would fix it, that Clara would just sign and it would all be over." "You're pregnant." It was the older cousin who'd whispered disgusting a few minutes earlier, her voice flat now with a different kind of disbelief. "Chloe, you're actually pregnant, and unmarried." The word landed across that lawn like a second detonation, and I watched, with a stillness that surprised even me, as 31 relatives' outrage pivoted in real time away from the fabricated scandal, and directly onto the real one Beatrice had spent a week trying to bury underneath my name. I let it burn for exactly as long as it needed to. Then I reached into my handbag and set 2 documents on the table, beside the torn wreckage of the lab report I'd ripped in half the moment the footage started playing. "This is a certified blood test," I said, sliding the first toward Uncle Richard. "Taken 4 days after the clinic's result, chain of custody documented, confirming what I already knew, I am not and was not pregnant." I set the second beside it. "And this is a civil complaint my attorney filed this morning, naming Beatrice and the clinic technician she paid for medical fraud and defamation." The medical board has already opened an investigation into the clinic. I imagine they'll be very interested in this footage as well. Beatrice opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in the 6 years I had known her, my mother-in-law had run entirely out of story. I stood, smoothed my dress, and looked around the table one last time at Alina, whose eyes held something that might in another life have become real respect. At Uncle Richard, already reaching for his phone, no doubt to call David directly and deliver a version of Tonight untouched by his mother's editing. At Chloe, sobbing into her own hands, finally, publicly, exactly as unprotected as she tried to make me. I filed for divorce this morning too, I said. David can read about Tonight in the paperwork, or he can call his uncle and hear it firsthand. Either way, I'll be gone before he lands. I didn't wait for a response. I walked the length of that long linen table, past 31 relatives who would spend the rest of their lives telling this story at every gathering that followed, out through the garden gate, past the string lights swaying gently in the warm evening air, to where my car sat waiting at the curb. I drove home with the windows down. Somewhere behind me in the wreckage of that dinner, a family was already beginning to tear itself apart over a secret they'd tried to bury inside my name. I found, driving away from it, that I felt nothing but the wind, and the quiet, and the particular lightness of a woman who has finally set down a weight she never should have been asked to carry. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. I kept the house. I kept the inheritance, untouched, exactly as my grandfather had intended it. The clinic lost its license within the year. Beatrice and the technician she'd paid were named in a settlement that cost them far more than my $4 million ever would have. Chloe had her baby quietly, in a state 3,000 miles from the family that had spent her entire life deciding who she was allowed to be, and I heard, secondhand, that she never went back. I didn't need to hear anything else. I already had everything I'd come for.